This is the Music History In-Depth podcast for August 21st through the 27th. On this week's show, we discuss an iconic movie musical that owes its pop culture status to television, the death of a manager, and we say happy birthday to a few music legends. First off, let us talk about a movie that owes its getting made to a Disney movie and was also plagued with a bunch of problems. For starters, this movie musical had at least 18 different writers touching its script, yet only 3 of them received the official writing credit for it. It went through numerous casting changes, including turning down 2 Hollywood legends, and it barely made any money for its studio. Yet, it was a critical success, was up for Best Picture at the Academy Awards, and found later success in pop culture status when it started getting played on television. This movie was originally a silent movie back in 1910, but the sound version was only greenlit by its studio, MGM, because of the success earlier of Disney's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, which proved that audiences would go to see movies based on children's books. The original script for the movie was pretty dark, and MGM absolutely hated it. They gave it to 3 different writers to come up with something different, but didn't tell the writers that each of them were writing the screenplay. Then, they took the best ideas, flushed out the characters, gave it to a bunch more writers to punch up the script, and finally, they had a working script to work with. Out of all of those writers, though, only 3 of them ever received official credit for the screenplay: Noel Langley, Florence Ryerson, and Edgar Allan Wolfe. Next came the casting. Hollywood legend W.C. Fields had a great role lined up in it, but couldn't agree on the money, so he was dropped. Another Hollywood legend, Shirley Temple, was supposedly up for the main role, but things didn't work out there either. Actress Deanna Durbin was also up for the main role, but was dropped. Most think because her singing style was very operatic, which was not needed for this particular movie. Buddy Ebsen, who later found fame on television on the TV shows Barnaby Jones and also the Beverly Hillbillies, was up for a role, but another actor who already had a role in the movie, Ray Bolger, wanted Buddy's role instead. The 2 swapped roles, but Buddy ended up with some very serious lifelong health problems with the makeup from the other role, so Jack Haley came in to fill Buddy's shoes while Buddy was recovering. Even the directing had problems. There were actually 4 directors during production, although Victor Fleming received the directing credit because it was really his vision for this particular project. Finally, on August 25th, 1939, after its West Coast premiere in Hollywood, California on August 15th and its East Coast premiere in New York City on August 17th, this movie was released nationwide. It made just over $3 million, or over $65 million in today's money. However, it had a movie budget of $2.777 million, or just over $60 million in today's money. So in actuality, it originally netted around $5 million in today's money, which by most Hollywood standards mean that it originally made pretty much nothing. However, it was a critical success and was nominated for 6 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, then known at that point as the Outstanding Production Award, where it was completely mowed down by a juggernaut of a movie that year called Gone with the Wind. Fun fact, Gone with the Wind is actually the biggest movie of all time if you base it on the number of movie tickets sold, beating out all the Star Wars movies, Titanic, Avengers, and Avatar. Also, this particular movie that we're talking about did clean house in the music categories for the Academy Awards, taking home the Best Original Score and Best Original Song Awards. However, that wasn't the end of the movie. In 1956, CBS television aired the movie, and it was so popular that much like the movie The Ten Commandments on ABC every Easter, CBS started airing it on television every year. So much so that it's now considered a pop culture classic, along with other movies that bombed at the box office but found life on television, like It's a Wonderful Life and also A Christmas Story. The movie is now a part of the Library of Congress National Film Registry and has also made 10 different American Film Institute best of lists. The movie that had W.C. Fields as the Wizard, which went to Frank Morgan. Shirley Temple, then Deanna Durbin as Dorothy, until that role went to Judy Garland, changing her life completely. Ray Bolger, who originally had the role of the Tin Man but swapped the role of the Scarecrow with Buddy Ebsen, who left that role because it literally almost killed him. They ended up giving Jack Haley that role and much better makeup for the Tin Man, thankfully. The movie that had witches, ruby slippers, and gave Munchkins lifelong employment by getting paid to go to sci-fi and comic conventions. The movie whose prequel of sorts started out as a Broadway musical before becoming the two-part movie musical Wicked. The Wizard of Oz premiered in wide release nationwide on August 25th, 1939. Next, no one knew it at the time, but a young woman who was on television the night of January 21st, 1957 would go on to become a country music icon, and it took a reality television show to do it. Back in the 1940s and 50s, Arthur Godfrey was the Dick Clark, or Ryan Seacrest, if you will, of television. He had a bunch of shows, both on radio and television, and was a household name. One of his shows was called Arthur Godfrey's Talent Scouts, where amateur entertainers would get their big break. It was a contest show. People would go on, do their performances, and the audience would pick the winner. Think of it as American Idol or The Voice before there was such a thing. In order to be on the show, though, you had to audition. Some people who were deemed not worthy enough to be on the show were Buddy Holly and Elvis Presley. Go figure. That does not, however, detract from the show's track record. Their list of soon-to-be stars who got their start on the show included Tony Bennett, Pat Boone, Lenny Bruce, the comedian, and Marilyn Horne. On January 21st, 1957, a young woman from Winchester, Virginia went on the show and performed the song Walking After Midnight. She won the contest that night. And that was when the world at large first heard Patsy Cline. Patsy was born Virginia Patterson Hensley on September 8, 1932 in Winchester, Virginia. She started out singing locally in Virginia at the age of 15. She married her first husband, Gerald Cline, in 1953 and was signed to the Four Star record label in 1954. Over the next couple of years, Patsy had a couple of small hits, 1955's A Church, a Courtroom, Then Goodbye, and 1956's I've Loved and Lost Again, but not much more. In 1957, she performed nationally on Arthur Godfrey's Talent Scouts, and after that, her life completely changed. In 1957, Patsy divorced Gerald Cline, but kept his last name for working purposes. She then got married to Charlie Dick later in the year, and in 1958 they had a child. She moved to Nashville in 1958 to further her career. She found new employment, became a member of the Grand Ole Opry, and signed to Decca Records. Patsy had a serious car accident in 1961, which took her about 6 months to recover from. Patsy would go on to have many hits from 1960 to 1963, including this classic. The song Crazy was written by country music legend, the iconic Mr. Willie Nelson, although he was not an icon at that point. Willie had gotten a recording contract with D Records in Houston, Texas, and had gotten a gig at the Esquire Ballroom there. He was also a DJ at a radio station in Pasadena, Texas. So during his commute back and forth between Pasadena and Houston, Willie wrote songs that he would try to sell to other artists. The song Crazy was one of those songs. It took him less than an hour to do it. His mindset at the time was that he was wondering if he was crazy for doing his commute back and forth to try to provide for his family, but he ended the song as if the relationship of the person in the song was ending. Willie's, for the record, was not. He was just tired from the commute, that was all. Patsy Cline's producer, Owen Bradley, liked the song and thought that it would be good for Patsy because of the jazzy chord progression in the song. Owen brought it to Patsy's husband, who brought it to Patsy. When Patsy Cline's husband first brought the song to her attention, he reportedly said, quote, "The song's crazy," end quote. To which Patsy reportedly then said, quote, "It certainly is," end quote. Guess she wasn't a big fan of the original version. To be fair, though, Willie's demo track had him speaking the words instead of singing them. Patsy gave it a chance, though. Recording sessions for the song started on August 21st, 1961, and finished on September 15th, 1961. Owen Bradley played organ and produced the song. The legendary Nashville session musician collective, known as the Nashville A-Team, were the other musicians on the record. That included Owen's younger brother Harold Owen on electric bass, future country superstar Floyd Kramer on piano, Buddy Harman on drums, Walter Haynes on steel guitar, Randy Hughes on acoustic guitar, Grady Martin on electric guitar, and Bob Moore on acoustic bass. The backing vocals were done by Elvis Presley's Rock and Roll Hall of Fame backup vocal band, the Jordanaires. Patsy Cline's version of the song Crazy was released on October 16, 1961 for her album Showcase. The song became a huge hit, going to number 2 on both the Billboard Country and Adult Contemporary charts, and number 9 on the Pop Singles chart. It was inducted into the Library of Congress's National Recording Registry in 1992 and the Grammy Hall of Fame in 2024. On Rolling Stone magazine's 500 Greatest Songs of All Time list, it ranks at number 85. On their 200 Greatest Country Songs of All Time list, it's at number 3. There have been, of course, other versions of the song recorded, including one by Willie himself, who released it on his 1962 debut album, And Then I Wrote. Patsy Cline's version of the Willie Nelson-written song Crazy started recording sessions on August 21st, 1961. Before we continue, we'd like to tell you about the Music History Today podcast, where we go over the events that happened on that particular day in music history. The Music History Today podcast drops every single day, including weekends, on this podcast network. Now, back to the Music History In-Depth podcast. There's been a lot of debate over the decades about who the mysterious, quote, fifth Beatle, end quote, was. I would say that there were actually 6 Beatles who were all equally responsible for the group's success. Of course, you have John, Paul, George, and Ringo, but you have to put Sir George Martin up there since he helped them craft their sound, especially on their last 5 or 6 albums. You also have to share credit for their earlier success with their manager, Mr. Brian Epstein. Brian Epstein was running his family's record store back in the early 1960s in Liverpool, England. He heard about the Beatles from a couple of guys who came into the store and asked for Beatles records. Legend has it that during a break from the store, he decided one day to walk over a few blocks to the Cavern Club to hear the Beatles play during the lunchtime. At that time, the Beatles were trying to manage themselves, and any musician these days will tell you that even with the internet and social media, that is a pretty daunting task. So imagine how tough it was back in the 1960s. Brian knew that even though he had never really managed a band before, he did have some good business sense. At least so he thought. He convinced the band, then at the time with Pete Best on drums instead of Ringo, to let him manage them for 25% of the band's gross earnings. The contract was for 5 years. That is an awful lot for a manager to take, but consider that without Brian, the Beatles might have been stuck forever in Liverpool as just another house band in a local club that didn't live up to its potential. For starters, Brian helped to craft their image. He got them to dress in suits rather than the leather outfits that they had been wearing before. The band bowing together after each song, Brian's idea. Brian got them their first record contract, and after that, the group were off and running. The one big problem with this whole deal was when it came to publishing rights. For those of you wondering how Paul McCartney didn't own the rights to his songs, pay attention. Back in 1963, Brian convinced the guys to start a publishing arm called Northern Songs. The company was mainly owned by two guys named Dick James and Charles Silver, who had 51% of the company. Remember, this company was formed to take care of the rights to the songs that John and Paul wrote. You would have thought that they would have been the ones with the 51%. In actuality, they only owned 20% each. They then had their own company with their rights along with it sold out from under them. Think of it as the Taylor Swift Scooter Braun situation. Always be majority owners in whatever creative endeavors you are doing, kids. Own your publishing rights. Oh, and also own your master copies. Lesson learned the hard way by a lot of artists, just saying. From that aspect, Brian Epstein was not good for the band in any way, shape, or form, but he was the glue that kept the band together. That glue, unfortunately, began to come apart in 1967. Brian had a history of insomnia and was taking medication to help get over it. I know, tale as old as time, and you know where this is heading. Around the time of his death, he had just gotten out of a clinic where he was trying to get help for his insomnia and was trying to stop taking those meds. He was supposed to be entertaining some guests that night, but they didn't show up until after he had left his country home. He drove back to London, drank some alcohol, and took something to help him sleep. The combination of the two was what ended up killing him. He was found dead by his butler on August 27, 1967. A lot of people believe that it was after this time when the writing was on the wall for the Beatles to split apart. They didn't know how to take care of the business end of things. That was Brian's job. Brian was also the band referee. Without him, there wasn't really anyone there to do it, although Sir George Martin did try, and boy did he try. In the end, the fights, growing ambitions, it all became a mess, and the Beatles finally called it quits. The beginning of the end, as some people say, was when Brian Epstein, manager of the Beatles, passed away on August 27, 1967, at the age of 32. Okay, well, after that depressing story, let's talk about some other things, including celebrating a few birthdays. First up, we spoke about this on our July 31st to August 6th edition of the podcast when we talked about their music video for the song Jeremy. However, let us briefly mention that Pearl Jam's debut album 10, which the song Jeremy came from, was released on August 27, 1991. That album, along with Nirvana's album Nevermind, became Generation X landmarks and ushered in the 90s grunge or Seattle sound era. This man is a musical genius and a legend. He was a composer and conductor. His mark was made on Broadway mainly. He wrote music for West Side Story, Peter Pan, Candide, On the Town, On the Waterfront, and a bunch of others. He also had a TV series of classical music concerts geared towards getting kids to love music. Bradley Cooper just played him in an Academy Award-nominated movie. His name was Leonard Bernstein, who was born on August 25, 1918. Next, this man is another music icon and legend. He was a jazz pianist and band leader. He started out his career by working the lights and doing piano for silent movies at a vaudeville theater. He started touring in bands playing piano until he ended up forming his own band. Among his legendary recordings is his signature song, 1 O'Clock Jump. His name is the Count Basie, born August 21st, 1904. Switching gears out of the golden age of entertainment for this next one, this woman became the youngest person ever admitted to the Peabody Institute at Johns Hopkins University at the age of 5. She got kicked out at the age of 11. Rock and roll, people, rock and roll. She was in a band called Why Can't Tori Read before going solo with 16 studio albums to her credit and counting. Her many hits include Cornflake Girl, Crucify, Silent All These Years, and A Sort of Fairy Tale. She is the Tori in Why Can't Tori Read, Miss Tori Amos, born August 22nd, 1963. This Canadian musician is an original member of his band. The other two members were drummer John Rutsey and bass player and singer Jeff Jones. Rutsey would be replaced by a guy by the name of Neil Peart, while Jones would be replaced by a guy by the name of Geddy Lee. The man was born Alexander Zvojinovich. You know him better as the guitarist for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame group Rush, Mr. Alex Lifeson, whose last name is a whole lot easier to pronounce than Zvojinovich. And Alex was born on August 27th, 1953. Drummer Keith Moon of The Who was born on August 23rd, 1946 in Wembley, England. Moon's drumming was revolutionary. He treated the drum kit like it was an instrument in its own right, emphasizing the fills, the cymbal crashes, and the tom-tom solos. His energetic and innovative approach helped to define The Who's raw, powerful sound. His influence on generations of drummers is, well, it's undeniable, actually. However, Moon's life was marked by equal parts brilliance and chaos. He was known for his extravagant and often extremely destructive behavior. He became almost as famous for his antics as he did for his musical talent. Everything from blowing up hotel bathrooms to extravagantly crazy parties. Moon's legendary status was cemented as much for his wild lifestyle as for his drumming. Tragically, Moon's life was cut short at the age of 32 due to medication. His death was a huge loss for The Who and for the music world at large. Despite the way that he lived his life, which was not only on the edge but way over it, Moon's legacy as one of the greatest rock drummers of all time remains intact. His impact on music is, you can't measure it. You can't. His name is synonymous with energy, rock and roll excess, and he is considered by most people to be the greatest drummer of all time, or second greatest, depending on if you think Neil Peart is actually better. But in any event, the legendary drummer Keith Moon of The Who, born August 23rd, 1946. These last two birthday mentions are for the Gen X crowd, myself included. Lane Staley was born on August 22nd, 1967, 6 months after Kurt Cobain of Nirvana. Lane's parents divorced when Lane was 7. He also grew up a Christian Scientist. Once he turned 16, he disavowed the church. He tooled around in a few small bands that went absolutely nowhere, but then one day in a rehearsal studio, he met guitarist Jerry Cantrell. They were roommates for a time and played in a funk band together, of all things. Jerry was interested in starting a different group with Sean Kinney on drums and Mike Starr on bass. They asked Lane to be the lead singer. Lane said no. Jerry knew that eventually Lane would join, so when Lane was around, Jerry would audition singers who weren't as good just to get Lane jealous and finally say yes. Apparently, the clincher was when Jerry auditioned a male stripper. They named the band Alice in Chains. That's a great one, by the way. Good way to do it there, Jerry. Good way to do it. A local promoter heard the band play in a local club and got them to do some demo recordings. The promoter took the demos to the managers of local band Soundgarden, who in turn sent them to Columbia Records. Alice in Chains were signed, and on August 21st, 1990, their first album, Facelift, was released. It became a big hit a little over a year later, thanks in no small part to Nirvana, who ended up releasing their major label debut, Nevermind, in 1991. Once Nirvana broke through, Alice followed, along with Soundgarden and Pearl Jam, in pretty rapid succession. Within a few months, these four bands and their lead singers became spokespeople for their generation. Pearl Jam's Eddie Vedder ended up on the cover of Time magazine. Both Pearl Jam and Nirvana ended up on separate covers of Rolling Stone magazine. Lane dealt with the pressures of all this fame by doing really bad things to his body. The way that things got with him were so bad that the band was having trouble putting tours together. Still, the band was pretty loyal to Lane and never actually officially kicked him out of the band, despite what he was putting himself through. They all just went and did different projects. One of their last shows was the MTV Unplugged performance, and if you look at that performance and the way that he was looking, you could tell that Lane was not in a good way. His last official performance with Alice in Chains was a concert in Kansas City, Missouri on July 3rd, 1996. In October of 1996, Lane's former fiancée, Demery Lara Perot, passed away, and that, according to many of his friends, was pretty much the death knell for Lane. It was as if the life had completely gone from his body. He started using heavily, and it started to show. At one point, he weighed around 80 pounds and was losing his teeth. He would show up in public every now and then, sometimes at one of Jerry's concerts, sometimes singing with another side project. He became increasingly isolated from both his friends and his family. According to bassist Mike Starr, who had left Alice in Chains pretty early on and was replaced by Mike Inez, Starr went to Lane's place on April 4th. He could tell that Lane was not well and had thought about calling 911. Lane apparently talked him out of it. The two then got into a fight. One thing led to another, and Starr stormed out of Lane's house with Lane yelling at him to not leave him like this. All of this according to Starr, who himself would pass away in 2011. Starr would be the last person officially to see Lane alive. On April 5th, 2002, exactly 8 years to the day of Kurt Cobain's passing, Lane passed away. His body was found 2 weeks later by the police, who were there searching for him once he was reported missing. His body was partially decomposed at that time, and he had to be identified by his dental records. A sad end for a very talented frontman. Lane Staley of Alice in Chains, born August 22nd, 1967. Finally, Rick Springfield was born Richard Springthorpe on August 23, 1949 in Australia. His father was in the Australian Army. He started out in his teenage years playing in a bunch of different bands with names like Zoot, MPD Limited, and such. He signed a solo record deal with Spamic Records in 1971. His debut album, Beginnings, was released in 1972. A single off of that album, Speak to the Sky, hit number 14 on the Billboard Singles Chart, and the album went top 40. Some radio stations boycotted his songs, though, once word got around, true or false, that his American record label, Capitol Records, was paying people to buy the album. In the 1970s, Rick also put out 3 other albums, gaining an image as a teen idol along the way. He also started acting at this point. He was in episodes of The $6 Million Man, The Hardy Boys' Nancy Drew Mysteries, Wonder Woman, The Rockford Files, and he was in the pilot episode of the original Battlestar Galactica television show, where he played a pilot who does not make it past the pilot episode. Rest in peace, Lieutenant Zach. We barely knew you. As the 1980s dawned, Rick was offered the role of Dr. Noah Drake on the TV soap opera General Hospital. At the time, soap operas were huge. General Hospital's Luke and Laura wedding episode was, and still is, one of the most watched television episodes of all time. Rick said yes to the offer because he didn't think that the album that he was working on at the time, Working Class Dog, was going to do too well, much like his last couple of albums. In the very beginning, kind of looked that way. Then, one of the songs on Working Class Dog got red hot. Jesse's Girl was written by Rick about his lust for his friend Gary's girl, who, for the record, was not named Jesse. The song was released in February 1981, but didn't hit the Billboard charts until the last week of March. As the year went on, the song became more popular, which drove ratings up for General Hospital. And as more people realized that Dr. Noah Drake on General Hospital was also the guy on the radio singing Jesse's Girl, more people bought both the song and the album. It took 19 weeks to do it, but finally, in August of 1981, just in time for MTV's debut, the song hit number one. His video getting played on MTV only kept the song around even longer. It became Rick's biggest single of his career. Rick became so popular that he would work on the soap opera during the weekdays and then go on tour gigs with his band on the weekends. He would win the Grammy Award for Best Male Rock Vocal Performance and would have a lot of hits in the 1980s like Don't Talk to Strangers, Affair of the Heart, Calling All Girls, I've Done Everything for You, Human Touch, and many more. He's acted on General Hospital off and on for the past 4 decades, and he still puts out albums and goes out on tour. Rick Springfield, born on August 23rd, 1949. And that is it for the Music History In-Depth podcast for August 21st through the 27th. Thank you very much for listening and or watching if you're on YouTube or Spotify.